The road leading to Black Hollow Asylum was nothing more than a forgotten path, swallowed by nature and time. Gnarled trees arched over the cracked pavement like skeletal fingers, their twisted limbs forming a grotesque tunnel that seemed to pulse with unseen horrors. The air was thick, humid, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something foul, like decay hidden beneath the soil. Nathan Carter gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. The headlights of his old sedan barely cut through the encroaching darkness, illuminating nothing but dense fog and the occasional road sign, rusted and defaced with cryptic warnings. He had seen the asylum before, pictures on conspiracy forums, grainy footage from thrill-seekers who had dared to enter. But none of those prepared him for the real thing. Black Hollow loomed ahead like a forgotten tombstone, its silhouette jagged against the moonless sky. The structure was massive, its windows blackened, its walls cloaked in creeping vines. A rusted metal gate stood between Nathan and the asylum, chains hanging loosely as if the place itself invited him in. He cut the engine, stepping out into the silence. Even the insects refused to sing here. The wind carried a distant whisper, something just on the edge of understanding, but when he turned, there was nothing, only the stillness of the night pressing against him like an unseen force. Nathan wasn't here on a whim. He had a purpose. For years, the asylum had been the subject of ghost stories, urban legends, and hushed whispers among locals. It was abandoned decades ago after reports of inhumane experiments, unexplained disappearances, and a final, horrifying massacre that left the walls soaked in blood. Official records were sparse, but Nathan had uncovered enough to know that something far worse than negligence had taken place within those halls. And now, he was determined to uncover the truth. With a deep breath, he pulled out his flashlight and camera, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. His heart pounded as he pushed the gate open with a groan of rusted metal, stepping onto the overgrown path leading to the entrance. The journey into madness had begun. The asylum doors stood ajar, gaping like a mouth waiting to consume him. Nathan hesitated at the threshold, his flashlight casting long shadows across the ruined lobby. The scent of mold and rot filled his nostrils, and something else, something acrid, metallic, like dried blood. The entrance hall was a wreck. Old wheelchairs lay overturned, their wheels rusted into place. The reception desk, once pristine, was now a splintered ruin, papers strewn across the floor as if someone had left in a hurry. The walls bore the remnants of peeling wallpaper, revealing dark stains underneath. Nathan stepped forward, his boots crunching on shattered glass. The sound echoed unnaturally, as if the asylum itself was listening. He lifted his camera, the red light blinking as he recorded his first steps inside. Black Hollow Asylum, he murmured, his voice low. Abandoned for over 30 years. Rumored to be haunted, but something tells me it's more than just ghosts lurking here. A scuttling noise made him freeze. He turned sharply, but the hallway behind him was empty. His flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams across the ruined walls. He moved deeper. The asylum seemed endless, its corridors stretching into inky blackness. Doorways gaped open, revealing rooms filled with rusted bed frames, tattered restraints, and walls etched with frantic carvings, messages from the past, scratched into the paint by trembling hands. They watch from the walls. Don't trust the whispers. It knows you're here. Nathan swallowed hard, his breath fogging in the cold air. He pushed forward, drawn toward the administrative wing where patient records might still remain. As he turned a corner, something shifted in the darkness. A shadow moved, too fast, too fluid. Nathan jerked his flashlight toward it, his heart slamming against his ribs. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. He exhaled sharply. Get a grip. He had spent years chasing stories, debunking myths, but something about this place felt wrong. As he reached the records room, he hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, a deep scratch running down its wooden frame. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stood like forgotten sentinels, their drawers rusted shut. Papers were scattered across the floor, yellowed with age, curling at the edges. Nathan crouched, sifting through them. Patient files. Most were routine, medication logs, evaluations, but then he found something different. A folder marked Subject 6. The contents made his blood run cold. Reports of an unidentified patient. No name, no background. Just a single note scrawled across multiple pages. Non-human. Do not engage. Nathan's breath hitched. He flipped through the rest, doctor's notes, but the writing became more erratic, devolving into panicked scribbles. It doesn't sleep. It wears their faces. We are not alone. A creak behind him. Nathan turned sharply, the flashlight trembling in his grip. The door, which had been open just moments ago, was now closed. And from the other side, something exhaled. Long, slow. Nathan staggered back, his pulse hammering in his ears. The sound of nails, no, claws, dragged against the wood. Then a whisper. Leave. The flashlight sputtered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When the beam returned, the door was open again. The hallway beyond was empty. Nathan forced himself to breathe. He had to keep going. There was more to uncover, more to understand. He stuffed the patient file into his bag and backed out of the room, every nerve in his body screaming at him to run. But he wasn't done yet. Something was waiting for him in the asylum's depths. And he was going to find it. Nathan's breath came in short, sharp bursts as he stepped back into the hallway, his fingers gripping the camera like a lifeline. The walls around him seemed tighter now, as if the asylum itself was shifting, reacting to his presence. The whispers from behind the door still lingered in his ears, hollow, unnatural, something that shouldn't be speaking. He checked his camera's footage. The screen flickered, distorting for a second before returning to normal. Whatever had happened in that room wasn't just his imagination. Something had been there, pressing against the other side of the door, warning him away. But turning back wasn't an option. Not yet. Nathan steadied himself and moved deeper into the asylum, his footsteps muffled by thick layers of dust. The air grew colder with each step, an unnatural chill that wormed its way beneath his skin. He tried to convince himself it was just the building's decay, the insulation long since rotted away. But the silence told a different story. Ahead, a metal sign dangled from the ceiling, rust eating away at the letters. Patient wards, level 2. He hesitated. The administrative wing had given him clues, but the real horror of Black Hollow lay within its patient cells. The stories spoke of inhumane experiments, mind-breaking therapies that turned men and women into something else. If there were answers to be found, they would be there. The staircase leading up was barely intact, the railing rusted through, steps sagging beneath his weight. With each creak of the wood, he imagined it collapsing, sending him tumbling into the blackness below. Reaching the top, he was met with a long hallway lined with doors marked only by numbers. The peeling paint, the flickering overhead lights. This place hadn't just been abandoned. It had been forgotten. Nathan's flashlight skimmed across the doors. Room 203. The door was different from the others. Reinforced metal. A sliding panel for observation. Deep scratches running down its surface. Something had tried to get out. Or worse, something had tried to keep it in. Nathan swallowed hard and reached out. The door groaned as it gave way, revealing a room frozen in time. A single bed, restraints still attached. The walls, scratched, gouged by fingernails that had long since rotted away. And in the center of it all, a chair, facing the wall. His breath hitched. Someone was sitting in it. The figure was motionless, draped in tattered hospital robes. Stringy black hair cascaded over its face, matted and unmoving. It was impossibly thin, bones pressing against the fabric. Nathan's body screamed at him to run, but something about the figure held him in place. It didn't breathe. It didn't move. But he knew it was aware of him. He stepped forward, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The figure remained still. Closer now. Close enough to see the bruised flesh, the long, bony fingers gripping the arms of the chair. Nathan reached out, heart pounding, and touched its shoulder. The body collapsed into dust. A sound, low, guttural, came from the walls themselves. A breathless, rasping laugh. Nathan stumbled back, barely catching himself before falling into the corner. The dust where the figure had sat swirled unnaturally, as if something invisible was shifting through it. A scrape from the doorway. Nathan turned sharply. The door he had left open was now halfway closed. A shadow flickered just beyond it. Someone, or something, was out there. His mind screamed for him to stay quiet, to stay still, but his body betrayed him. His foot slid against the dust-covered floor, the noise impossibly loud in the suffocating silence. The shadow outside stopped. Nathan held his breath. Then the whisper returned. "You should not be here." The voice was wrong. Too many layers, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. It was neither male nor female, old nor young. It was empty. Nathan lunged for the door, slamming it shut and twisting the rusted lock. His heart pounded as he backed away, staring at the crack beneath it. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps. They stopped just outside. The lock rattled. Nathan felt ice crawl up his spine. He pressed himself against the wall, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. The rattling grew more frantic, shaking the door in its frame. Then, silence. Nathan didn't move. Minutes passed. Finally, he forced himself to inch forward. He reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the doorknob. It was hot. Yanking his hand away, he stared in horror as the metal began to blacken, as if something on the other side was burning the door. A whisper, "Closer now. You belong to us." Nathan bolted. He turned, searching for another exit. A vent, small, rusted, but open, near the ceiling. He scrambled onto the remains of the bed, gripping the edges, and pulled himself inside just as the door behind him exploded open. He didn't look back. He didn't want to see what had entered the room. The vent was narrow, suffocating, lined with jagged metal that scraped against his arms as he crawled. The smell of rust and mildew filled his lungs, but it was better than whatever had been in that room. Nathan kept moving, ignoring the sharp pain in his knees as they dragged against the corroded surface. He had to get out. A noise ahead. Something moving. He froze, barely breathing. The darkness ahead was impenetrable, but he felt it. A presence. A breath, rasping, hollow, coming from inside the vent. Fingers. Long, thin fingers, dragging across the metal just inches ahead of him. Nathan's body reacted before his mind did. He shoved himself backward, scrambling, his legs kicking against the narrow space. The fingers twitched, reaching closer. The vent beneath him gave way. He fell, crashing through rusted metal and landing hard on the floor below. Pain shot through his arm as he rolled onto his back, dazed. Above him, the vent remained dark. Empty. No movement. But he knew something had been there. He struggled to his feet, clutching his camera against his chest. He had to move. Had to get out before. A click. Nathan's blood ran cold. The hallway ahead of him was lined with doors. One had just unlocked itself. A slow creak echoed as it swung open, revealing nothing but blackness beyond. A whisper, "Closer now," almost inside his head. "Come deeper." Nathan turned and ran. Nathan's footsteps echoed down the long, rotting corridor as he ran, his breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The open door behind him gaped like a black hole, its unseen occupant watching, waiting. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to put as much distance between himself and whatever lurked in that room. The asylum groaned around him, its structure unstable, its walls heavy with secrets. He had spent years chasing haunted locations, debunking myths, but nothing had ever felt like this. This was more than residual energy, more than ghost stories whispered around a campfire. Black Hollow was alive. And it did not want him to leave. Nathan skidded to a stop at a four-way junction. The hallway split into three directions. One path leading deeper into the asylum, one toward what looked like a collapsed wing, and another sloping downward, toward the basement. He had two choices. Forward into the unknown, or down into the dark. A sound behind him, a dragging noise, wet and slow. Nathan spun around, flashlight trembling. The door that had opened by itself was now closed again. But something stood in front of it. A figure. No, not a person. Its body was twisted, hunched in an unnatural way, limbs too long, its head lolling to one side as if its neck had been snapped. What little flesh clung to its bones was rotten, gaping wounds exposing things that shouldn't be moving beneath its skin. And its face? Nathan's stomach lurched. It had no face. Just smooth, featureless flesh stretched where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. And yet he felt it looking at him. The thing shuddered, twitched, then took a step forward. Nathan didn't wait. He turned and sprinted down the hallway leading deeper into the asylum. The hall twisted in impossible ways, doors shifting, walls closing in, as if the building itself was rearranging around him. He ran blindly, not stopping until he reached another open doorway. Beyond it, a vast circular room stretched before him, filled with rows of empty chairs facing a massive, floor-to-ceiling mirror. The observation hall. Nathan hesitated, glancing behind him. The faceless thing was gone, but he could still feel it, lurking just out of sight. Taking a shaky breath, he stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy with dust and something else. Something wrong. Rows of rusted, bolted-down chairs faced the mirror, as if a group of patients had once been forced to sit here and watch, what? The reflections of themselves? Or something behind them? Nathan's flashlight flickered. The mirror. For a moment, he swore he saw movement behind the glass, a shifting shadow that wasn't his own. He stepped closer. His reflection stared back, gaunt and wide-eyed, sweat glistening on his skin. But something was off. His reflection wasn't holding a flashlight. Nathan's pulse spiked. He lifted his arm. His reflection did not. The breath caught in his throat. The other him, the one inside the mirror, began to smile. Slow. Unnatural. Stretching too wide, revealing teeth that weren't his own. To move. Not as a reflection, but independently, stepping forward, pressing its hands against the glass from the other side. Nathan stumbled back, panic clawing up his throat. The thing inside the mirror grinned wider, its teeth jagged and uneven. Then it whispered, "Trade places?" Nathan shook his head violently. No, this isn't real. The thing's face twisted, morphing into something else. His mother. "Nathan, please help me." He froze. It sounded exactly like her. The voice, the pleading tone, memories of her hospital bed, her frail fingers clutching his, whispering that she didn't want to go yet. This was a trick. The thing wasn't her. The voice distorted, shifting, warping. His mother's face melted away, replaced by something monstrous, eyeless, grinning. The glass began to crack. Nathan stumbled backward, knowing that if it shattered, whatever was inside would be free. He turned and bolted toward the exit. The door slammed behind him as he raced into another hallway. The asylum was shifting again, stretching, twisting corridors that shouldn't exist. The air pulsed, the walls vibrating with something ancient. Nathan kept moving, deeper into the labyrinth. A voice. "Nathan." He stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because his body refused to move. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing against his skin. His flashlight dimmed, flickering in and out. And then, just ahead, a figure stepped into the light. It was him. A perfect copy. Same clothes, same wounds, same wide, terrified eyes. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The copy smiled. "You don't belong here." Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears. He tried to move, to do something, but his body remained frozen. The copy took a step closer. Then another. Nathan wanted to scream, but no sound came. The air turned electric, vibrating with unseen energy. Darkness swallowed everything. When Nathan woke, he was lying on cold, damp tile. His body ached, his mind sluggish as if he had been drugged. Slowly, painfully, he sat up. He was in a different room now. A morgue. Metal autopsy tables gleamed under flickering lights. The walls were lined with body lockers, their doors rusted shut. The air was thick with the stench of formaldehyde and rot. Nathan's camera was still in his grip. He lifted it with shaking hands, pressing the playback button. The last recording played. At first, it was just static. A distorted image. Himself. Standing in front of the mirror. Except, he hadn't been holding the camera. The reflection had. Nathan's stomach dropped. The voice from the recording whispered, crackling with static. "You traded places?" Nathan's blood turned to ice. The camera slipped from his hands. A slow, deliberate scraping sound came from the body lockers behind him. One of the doors creaked open. Nathan didn't turn around. He couldn't. A whisper right behind his ear. "Welcome home." Darkness swallowed the light. Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears as the last whisper faded into the suffocating darkness. The morgue pressed in around him, cold and unyielding. The air reeked of decay, and the slow creak of the body locker behind him sent an icy spike through his spine. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Something had emerged. The silence stretched, thick and unnatural. Then a sound, slow, deliberate footsteps. Nathan's body tensed. The thing behind him was watching. A guttural, rasping breath filled the space, too deep, too wrong. Then, another locker creaked open. And another. Nathan's shaking hand inched toward his camera. He had dropped it when the whisper had spoken. If he could just reach it? A third locker slammed open, metal screeching against metal. That was it. Nathan lunged for the camera, fingers closing around the cold plastic just as something rushed at him from behind. A wave of freezing air crashed into him as he threw himself forward, rolling across the filthy floor. He twisted, lifting the camera, the lens catching the briefest glimpse of something crawling from the lockers. A figure? No figures. They spilled out unnaturally, their bodies twisted, moving in ways that defied human anatomy. Their flesh was stretched, skin pulled too tight over elongated limbs, their hollow eye sockets peering blindly in his direction. Nathan scrambled to his feet, backing toward the door. His camera flickered in and out of focus. The hollow ones, that's what the asylum records had called them. The patients who had undergone the worst of Black Hollow's treatments. No souls. No humanity left. Just empty husks. One of them turned its head in a slow, jerking motion, its eyeless sockets locking onto him. Its mouth gaped open in a soundless scream. Nathan turned and ran. The hallway outside was shifting again. Doors that had once been there were now gone. The path ahead was unfamiliar, the ceiling pressing lower, the walls pulsing like a living thing. Nathan sprinted, his breath ragged. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to keep moving. Behind him, the hollow ones followed. Not running. Not chasing. Just appearing, shifting through the darkness, their movements jagged and wrong. Nathan rounded a corner and slammed into a door. He barely had time to react before wrenching it open and diving inside. The door shut behind him with a deafening clang. Silence. His breath came in quick gasps as he pressed his back against the cold metal. His flashlight flickered weakly, casting dim, unreliable light across the room. It was a therapy chamber. The walls were lined with metal chairs, each one fitted with rusted restraints. Electroshock machines stood abandoned in the corners, wires dangling like vines. Nathan's gut twisted. This was where they had torn people apart, not physically but mentally. Where Black Hollow had broken minds until there was nothing left but hollow shells. He moved cautiously, stepping over scattered files and overturned furniture. His camera scanned the room, recording everything. A voice. "Nathan?" He froze. The voice was his own. Slowly he turned. Across the room, someone was sitting in one of the chairs. Nathan lifted his flashlight. His stomach dropped. It was him. Tied to the chair. His own face stared back, eyes vacant, mouth slack. His arms were bound, wrists raw from struggling against the restraints. The bound Nathan slowly lifted his head. And smiled. "You don't remember, do you?" it whispered. Nathan's body went cold. "You were always here." The air thickened, pressing down on him. The camera in his hands flickered violently, static crackling through the screen. His vision blurred, flashes of something else. Memories that weren't his. He saw himself, trapped, bound to the chair. Doctors standing around him, murmuring in low, unnatural voices. Needles piercing his skin. Wires strapped to his skull. Nathan staggered backward, shaking his head. No, No, I wasn't. The bound version of him laughed. A dry, broken sound. You were one of us. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The hollow ones. The asylum. His entire life. His search for haunted places, for the truth. Was it all just fragments of something he had been forced to forget? You left, Nathan? The copy of him tilted its head. But the asylum never lets anyone go. The door behind him rattled. Nathan whipped around. The hollow ones were here. The door groaned, metal bending inward as unseen forces pressed against it. He had seconds before they got in. But the chair was empty. No straps. No body. Just an outline burned into the chair's surface. Like someone had been there for a very, very long time. Nathan felt something behind him. A presence. Cold breath against his ear. It's time to wake up. A hand clamped over his face. And the world collapsed into blackness. When Nathan opened his eyes, he was lying on the floor. The asylum was silent. The hollow ones were gone. His camera was still in his hands, its screen cracked but recording. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up. His head pounded, memories flickering in and out like a broken film reel. He was still in Black Hollow. But something was different. The air felt lighter, as if the asylum had loosened its grip. The doors that had disappeared before were now back. The walls no longer pulsed like a living thing. And then, Nathan saw it. His own reflection in a broken shard of glass. Except it wasn't his reflection. It was the other him. Standing in the mirror. Smiling. And slowly, the reflection raised a hand. Nathan's own hand stayed at his side. You left something behind, the reflection whispered. Nathan's blood ran cold. A door creaked open behind him. The basement staircase. Leading to the final truth. Nathan swallowed hard. He had two choices. Leave now, escape before the asylum changed its mind. Or go deeper. To find out who he really was. His hands trembled. But he already knew his answer. Nathan stepped toward the basement. And the darkness swallowed him whole. The basement stairs yawned before Nathan like the open jaws of some unseen beast, waiting to consume him whole. His flashlight flickered, struggling against the thick, swallowing darkness. The air was heavier here, pressing down like a lead weight on his chest. Each step creaked under his weight, the sound swallowed quickly by the stillness. He knew, deep in his bones, that what lay beneath Black Hollow Asylum wasn't just history. It was him. His real past. The truth he had spent a lifetime chasing. And the asylum had finally decided to show him. At the bottom of the stairs, the air changed. No more rotting wood. No more collapsing walls. The space before him was pristine. Polished white tile gleamed under flickering fluorescent lights. The walls were lined with sterile metal cabinets, labeled drawers, and surgical equipment arranged with eerie precision. The asylum's decay had not touched this place. It was as if it had been preserved. Waiting. Nathan stepped forward, his breath shallow. Rows of cold storage units lined the walls. Each one marked with a name. His eyes scanned them and then, he stopped. One of the labels read, Nathan Graves. His chest tightened. This had to be a trick. Slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the metal handle. The chill burned his skin, but he pulled. The drawer slid open with a smooth, mechanical hiss. Inside, a body, covered in a white sheet. Nathan's stomach lurched. His hands trembled as he reached for the edge of the cloth. And pulled it back. It was him. His own face, pale, lifeless. His lips slightly parted, his eyes shut in eternal sleep. Nathan stumbled back, shaking his head. This wasn't possible. He was alive. He had a life. He had memories. Didn't he? The walls seemed to pulse, the fluorescent lights flickering violently. A deep, low humming filled the room. And then, a door at the far end of the chamber clicked open. Nathan turned, his pulse hammering. There was someone inside. A figure sat at a desk, their back to him, hunched over a collection of patient files. The room beyond was filled with cabinets, shelves of documents, and dozens of monitors, each one showing him footage of his past, his time in Black Hollow, the therapy sessions, the electroshock treatments, the experiments. His mind fractured, spiraling into a dizzying blur of images. The figure slowly turned. A doctor, dressed in a crisp white coat, eyes gleaming behind small, round glasses. Their face was familiar, too familiar. Nathan knew them. A name surfaced in his mind like a long-buried memory. Dr. Edgar Holloway. The man who had run the asylum. The one responsible for the hollow ones. Dr. Holloway smiled. "Ah, Nathan," he said softly. "I see you finally found your way back." Nathan's throat was dry. His body refused to move, his muscles frozen in place as Holloway calmly gestured to a chair across from him. "Sit," the doctor said. Nathan didn't move. The monitors behind the doctor shifted, showing him again, only it wasn't recent footage. It was older. Black and white clips of him as a patient, being dragged down the halls. Strapped to a chair. Screaming. "That isn't real," Nathan whispered. "I was never." "Were you?" Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, Nathan, how much do you truly remember before Black Hollow?" The words sent a cold knife through his gut. His childhood. His past. His life before this place. The details were blurry. Fragments of something distant. Unreal. Holloway stood, stepping closer. "You were one of my finest patients," he continued. "A true success story. You were broken, lost, and I helped you." "No," Nathan shook his head. "You're lying. I came here to investigate. You came home." The words ripped through him like a physical blow. Holloway leaned down, his voice soft, hypnotic. "You wanted the truth. And here it is. You never left, Nathan." The monitors glitched, showing flashes of something else. His escape. The night he had fled the asylum. But, had he? The images rewound, showing him strapped to a chair. His head restrained. A needle pressed against his temple. And then, a second Nathan stood beside the restrained one. Watching. Smiling. A hollow, empty smile. Nathan's mind fractured. The asylum had let him go once. But it hadn't been him. It had been the thing they created. A hollow one that took his place. And the real Nathan? Had never left. Had never escaped. He had been here the whole time. Nathan staggered backward. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. Holloway watched, amused. "It's fascinating, really. Your mind constructed an entirely new reality. A life outside of this place. But deep down, you always knew, didn't you?" Nathan clutched his head. His thoughts spiraled, his memories warping. The YouTube videos. The investigations. Had any of it been real? Or had he been dreaming from inside this place? The asylum groaned, the walls trembling. The air thickened, pressing down on him. The truth was suffocating. He turned, desperate for a way out. But the door behind him was gone. Only a mirror remained. And in its reflection, the other him stood there. Watching. Waiting. A hollow one. The copy they had created. The thing that had lived his life for him. It lifted a hand. And waved. Nathan's scream never left his throat. Final recording. Nathan's camera sat on the floor, its lens cracked but still recording. The screen flickered, static bleeding through the last few moments of footage. The chair in the center of the room was now occupied. Nathan sat there, strapped in place. His mouth slightly parted. His eyes blank. Empty. A voice played through the static, Dr. Holloway's. "Welcome back, Nathan." The screen cut to black. And the asylum was silent once more.